The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com.
Hey, welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, and we are still pushing to hit some members here on Patreon. Want to thank all of our recent subscribers as we are looking to close the year strong. Our goal was to hit 20 new subscribers, so you can join us for just $5 a month on Patreon. You get ad-free episodes and access to the full back catalog of our subscriber extra episodes. That's bonus time with some of our favorite guests. Get the link to start your free 7-day trial and see if Patreon's a good fit for you in the notes for this episode. I love getting returning guests. He's the past master of the Arizona Lodge of Research, and he's joining us to explore the Masonic Mind. You'll remember our conversation with him earlier this year on the science of happiness, which touched on what makes Freemasonry a unique experience for men. Let's get him back on. Worshipful Brother Ted Cross, welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm sure I've shared this with you. I've shared this with our listener. We record this, and then I edit this, and then months, sometimes weeks later, it gets released. And that's when I actually get to listen to the episode when I'm out running or working out. And so I'm like really listening to that one, and I was like, oh, that was so fascinating. So we're going to make sure that the link to listen to that episode is in there. But mainly, Brother Ted goes inside of our minds and kind of helps us understand feelings and how we can associate them with Freemasonry and this experience that we enjoy with being a Mason. So let's get back to kind of that mode there. You were talking about in your psychological assessment, like some of the core differences between Freemasons or Freemasonry versus, let's say, like the Rotary Club, an Elks Lodge, maybe a hobby club or some other group. What is different about the craft experience?
Well, first I'll say that it has a lot of similarities that do lead to happiness and flourishing. And that's kind of what we covered last time, which was Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, talks about this PERMA model: positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And you can really see that a lot of those sort of features are also inside of lots of different types of clubs. You can get together and create meeting. You can have positive relationships. You can find positive emotions and activities that create those inside of lots and lots of different types of organizations. But I think that Freemasonry has some real differentiators. And I think that's what we should delve into today, which is it's not just that it's a club centered around rituals and symbols. And yes, other groups might have some rituals and symbols, but I would say in Freemasonry, it's so central that sometimes we even say that's what Masonry is that ritual and symbols. We're practicing Masonry, or we're laboring together in the quarry on these rituals. And so why is that so important? Other organizations have sort of got rid of those. And you even see this sort of in the Scottish Rite, different jurisdictions. Sometimes some are heavily ritualized, and maybe the Northern Masonic is more lightly ritualized in different ways. Like they're showing more of a modern take on those older rituals, right?
Oh, the degrees, yeah.
So the question is, like, why is that important to have inside of an organization, and what makes Masonry effective in our mission of making good men better through that process?
This is where I feel like we don't help ourselves with the conspiracy wingnuts when we talk about ritual. Just that word. If you're outside of Freemason, you're like, what is ritual? Are they sacrificing? No. It's part of the degree process. We refer to it as a ritual. But also inside of that ritual are all the symbols within Freemasonry. And that also, spend enough time on the internet, they'll have you convinced that we were doing all kinds of crazy things. Let's examine this from a psychological standpoint, because I want to get into that point. We talked a lot about the lodge, but there's also the symbolism of like what the lodge represents. And how does all of this come together and shape the individual's experience when it comes to being a Freemason?
I think it's important first to understand that Freemasonry is a treasure trove of symbols and ideas and philosophies that come from all over the place. So Um, Many Masons want to point to one particular place that Freemasonry originated, but the answer is it's Enlightenment invention that was sort of picking and choosing from the junkyard of history, trying to gather
Mm.
in all those good ideas, and comes through the idea of the Enlightenment. And so they're pulling ideas from everywhere and weaving it into our system of degrees and our philosophies that are powering those degrees and the symbols that are inside of those degrees. So you can find Masonic symbols all over the place that aren't in Masonic organizations. Of course, many of us have seen early Christian depictions that have um, squares and compasses in them, for instance, and those kinds of things. But the question is, why do they choose those ones, and how do they get into our degree system? And I would argue that it has something to do with our collective unconscious minds. That we have this idea that is evolutionarily, as we have evolved, certain ideas have stuck around with us. And that's why we find similar features across religions, similar features across different cultures, different values and morality systems often tend to share large portions with each other. And many theorists argue that that's because over time we sort of kept the things that work. Uh,
Mm.
and those have emerged sort of organically over thousands and thousands of years. So Carl Jung would call that, well, that's our collective unconscious. Um, that's our collective sort of evolutionary residue that is with all of us. And then biologically, as we have evolved, the first part of our brain was that reptilian primitive brain, which often is what's powering sort of your unconscious mind. And then later we evolved to be more rational, right? And that's one of the things we think is that we're rational as modern humans, but we're really more irrational than we want to believe. And there's a lot of science behind that.
I'm laughing because we are. That's the funny part. We err. I'm also laughing because I can't believe it has taken us this long in 2 episodes to get to this question, which is like the central part of Freemasonry. It's the part that I love talking about. I love when we get brothers and guests that come on the podcast and talk about the brotherhood that exists within Freemasonry. Personally, I feel like I'm never a stranger and I'm never alone whenever I walk into a Masonic lodge. It doesn't matter if it's another lodge here in my home district or if I'm in another state or another part of the country. If I walk into a Masonic lodge, I'm amongst brothers and there's that instant bond. That's how I feel like internally. I'd like to get your examination of that, the importance of that feeling of belonging that comes and maybe some of the deeper elements that kind of create these connections.
Yeah, there is a real brotherhood, I think, in Freemasonry. And of course, there's sort of practical reasons why that's important. We talked about relationships and having positive relationships in our last episode and how that increases longevity, health, and happiness, but also provides psychological safety. When you have people that you can trust and talk to when things happen in your life, as they do, you have something to rely on. They've even done studies that show that people rebound from illness faster. That actually give people like a muted flu virus and see if they're sort of in a community whether or not they heal faster. And the answer is yes, they actually do. And so it's a protective thing. They also have found that folks who experience trauma that have better community connections or close relationships also tend to fare better, and be able to go through their trauma rather than sort of really falling into depression. Not that you won't get depressed, but that you can rebound a little bit more easily because of those relationships you have. So brotherhood really is important. I think our rituals and our symbols create a common language for us to share with each other. So if we think about Robert Putnam's idea of social capital, and there's two kinds, there's bonding social capital and there's bridging social capital. Bonding is the glue, the social glue. So how do you bond to each other? And that creates in-group cohesion. So a very strong in-group and group identity. And then bridging social capital is like the WD-40 of social capital. It's the how do we make sure that things are smooth across different groups? So Freemasonry is interesting because It brings people from disparate backgrounds together. And it says, let's adopt this common degree work, rituals, symbols, and narrative to bond us together, but it's bonding together people from different walks of life. So it builds both bonding and bridging. The problem with, for instance, in my religious tradition that I come out of, has tons of bonding culture. There's rituals, there's things, but even though we say we are friendly to outsiders, we're a little bit not as open as we probably should be to outsiders. Where Freemasonry can say, we're going to take people from various faith traditions, philosophical and otherwise, and bring them together. And we're not asking you to sort of commit to anything that is so radical philosophically, right? The morals, we'll talk about the 4 cardinal virtues in a minute. These things are kind of basic, but let's join together on those. And I'm not going to ask you particularly your theology or your dogmas you believe in. We're going to leave that out, and we're going to try to go to some common ground.
At the time of us recording this episode, it's September, so I just got back from vacation. By the time it airs, I think it's scheduled for a release in December, so listeners are going to be like, where'd you go on vacation? Anyways, so during that, I was having a conversation in a cigar lounge with a couple guys, not Masons. We were talking about Freemasonry. And one of them was like, oh, I hear there's a lot of religion in Freemasonry. And he was a very religious and spiritual person. And I'm like, yeah, it's woven into our degree work, but it's not necessarily what Freemasonry is all about. And so we started having that conversation of, your acceptance of faith being challenged. That's something that we mentioned in the New York ritual in the first degree. And we were having a really interesting conversation about just the different traditions and the cultures that are out there. And I realized during this conversation that my friend was really kind of just staying focused on, he was very into Christianity, where I was talking about Buddhism and some of the other Eastern principles and philosophies. And it was just fascinating because I would have never been exposed to any of these other ideas or thoughts if I hadn't met these other unique, cool men in Masonry that we kind of come together, as you say, with the concept of being like-minded. And I feel like this is one of the, I don't want to make this like a pitch session here, but it's one of the things we don't talk a lot about in the craft that does kind of go back to your Science of Happiness episode that you talked about, that there is this longing to belong and being connected. As human beings, we have that just burning in us. Some of us, it burns a little hotter than others, I'd say. But regardless, that's one of the things, the brotherhood, we don't talk a lot about that in Freemasonry. Although I think for those that do come to visit a lodge, it's visibly on display. You can tell that these guys are friends, that they hang out outside of the lodge, that they know each other's families. They know what matters and what's meaningful to these other men in their lives because they're Masons and they have spent time together.
A couple of years ago, my wife ended up having to go to the ICU. She went septic and she was on death's doorstep. And, I called my lodge members and asked them, would you guys say a special prayer in stated meeting for us? When they, that was really meaningful to me because I knew that they were thinking about me. Now, can you get that with your religious group and others? Sure. But it's a bit different for guys. Sometimes we don't make friends as much. There's lots of research that shows that married couples who retire, if the woman happens to die first, which isn't statistically often, men often fare poorly because their social connections are gone, because it's the woman who actually does all these things and sort of coordinates a lot of these things, which is, I don't know if it's nature or nurture. It's probably more socialized than we want to admit, sort of these gender roles. But I think Freemasonry can provide sort of a historic and safe organization for men to build friendships and show vulnerability in a way that feels like these guys aren't going to put my news on blast.
Agree. And also, worshipful, a first. We have never had a brother drop news on blast on the podcast yet. So congratulations. That's yours now. That's your honor. I want to talk a little bit about with you, Brother Ted, on the idea of making a good man better, because we've talked a lot about like the individual. And as I shared previously with you, because I was like, oh, yes, another Arizonan. So I grew up in Yuma, which is, well, at the time it was a tiny town. It's gotten a little bit bigger over the years. But there's not a lot of diversity in Yuma, Arizona. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I'm sure it's like any other small town anywhere across the U.S. What's really interesting that I find in Freemasonry when we talk about that group dynamic is we do talk a lot about making a good man better. You know, there's a lot of personal development, personal growth that goes into it. And it's heavily the backbone for us is that ethical framework that definitely exists in all of our Masonic ritual. But can you touch on kind of the power of the group and being around others and that exposure that helps with self-help or character building within the individual, the benefit of being in that group dynamic?
So Aristotle would say that character cannot be formed outside of a community. So it's not an individual pursuit. And his idea of a sort of reaching your telos or your mature, ripe state, your end state, your reason to exist was to be a good member of society, right? So that's what he's aiming at, flourishing human beings and flourishing society. And so the behavioral science is starting to show that. Certainly, we know there's experiments, for instance, that on average, you weigh close to what your best 5 friends weigh. They've even done experiments where they've put, this was a professor in one of our business schools the other day was telling us about an experiment she did where she wanted to see what influenced food choices for students. And one of the biggest influences was what is the food that everyone around you at the lunch table was picking. You'll do that. You might have experienced this at a restaurant. Like, oh, they're gonna get the cheesecake. Okay, I'll get the cheesecake. Like there's these. So the group influences us, and the way I think about this is, you know, I grow these little bonsai trees over here. And if there's a problem with the bonsai tree where it's starting to look yellow or something, I don't go shake the bonsai tree and say, what the hell's the matter with you? You start growing correctly. I look at its environment and I see what is wrong with the environment that is causing this thing not to flourish. And so the community that we're planted in is all the difference.
It's interesting. Steve Harvey, of all people, the guy who's the new host of The Family Feud, he has that same line. He's like, if you have 3 friends who smoke, guess what? You're going to be the 4th person that smokes. If you have 3 friends who are broke, guess what? You're going to be the 4th friend who's broke. It's so true. Like who you associate yourself with, it does affect the person you become, or it projects to the person that you're going to become.
We also know that, for instance, that big brothers and big sisters is actually the best intervention to keep kids off drugs. I don't know if we mentioned that last time, but that's the only one. That's one of the only interventions we have data, right? And that's because there's this. It's a role modeling thing, right? Young kids get to see an adult maybe outside their social circle that is modeling different behavior, maybe than they are experiencing at home, and because of that, they can sort of, oh, maybe there's a chance I could act like that, or I could be like that, or I could have this kind of potential too.
I want to talk about the power of going through our degree works and how that shapes you as a Freemason. We've seen it in ourselves. We may have noticed it. It's more noticeable, I think, in other people when you see, a guy who's interested in joining Freemasonry, he comes and petitions a lodge, he gets accepted to join the lodge, boom, he gets his first degree, and he gets that first dose of like Masonic lessons or teachings, right? What is the impact or the progressive nature of being a Freemason going through these degrees? How does that structure help build a man?
Well, from a pedagogical or andragogological standpoint, like a learning standpoint, it is scaffolded, right? So it starts with some basic lessons in the first degree. Then it gets into some more complicated things about the liberal arts and sciences in the second degree. And then the third degree is about your own mortality, right? And so it's this progression from, can you manage your life? Think of the 24-inch gauge, common gavel. Like how do you manage yourself just practically? To how do you cultivate your mind, and then how are you thinking about your sort of eternal self and mortality? And all through that is this idea of reflective process and this idea that you should be rethinking and re-examining yourself all the time, with the assumption, I think, that you're probably wrong at different points. And similarly, the degrees also progress from giving you basic knowledge on one symbol to increasingly um, elaborating on that symbol. So you're starting to see, I'm a novice. I haven't joined the lodge yet. There's a checkerboard I'm walking on. Well, that's not a checkerboard. That's called mosaic pavement. Why is it called that? Okay, so there's a lot of curiosity, and then it builds on itself. Oh, my checkered life, my checkered past, I'm standing on white and black at the same time. Right? There's all these ideas that start coming about and building on each other from, I guess you could even say it's a hermeneutical progression. When you analyze a text through hermeneutics, usually the Bible, for instance, there's the literal interpretation, the allegorical interpretation, and then there's sort of like the esoteric and spiritual interpretation. And you can go through those three levels looking at the degree in different ways. I come at it from the psychological often, like in some of the religious perspectives, but you might interpret it in different ways. But there is a scaffolded approach, I think, to those degrees as effective.
We've talked about the significance and the importance of symbolism, the ritual, the community of brothers that exists within Freemasonry. Stop me if you've heard this expression before, that every man can be a Freemason, but Freemasonry might not be right for every man. In your experience, Brother Ted, has there been any kind of profiles, or maybe if that's not a great word, like personality traits that you find that would be drawn to Freemasonry that would be a good fit? And then on the other end are those types that are out there, those personality profiles that just might not be a good fit to join a lodge?
Yeah, I've had a lot of thought on this, particularly your phrase, about Freemasonry being for every man, but maybe not for a particular individual. And someone put it to me this way: Freemasonry is for everyone, but not every lodge is. I've settled on that as my philosophy. However, I think you're right. There is something to guarding the West Gate that we talk about, and this idea of who is part of that circle that's going to influence you, as we mentioned before. And so I would say, my opinion is one of the prerequisites to become a good Freemason is to be curious, want to learn, and to change. Uh, we're not here to stay the same. We're here to learn things. And then from a psychological perspective, the most validated personality model is OCEANS, which stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And those are the 5 dimensions of personality. I would say we have a mix of all kinds of people that come to the craft, but a lot of them are high on openness, like they're open to new ideas. You mentioned being able to think about Eastern religious philosophy and Western religious philosophy and not have your head explode, or, get mad at others because they don't think the way that you think. There's that openness. I would say I put in my notes last night when I was preparing for this. Probably the ritualists have a lot of conscientiousness in them. They're very conscientious. They want to make sure things are exact. Some of the past masters, I'm just joking, probably have some neuroticism in there, right? So there's some of those things.
So I jotted down 3 things because I was like, I'm curious if we're going to match up on this. I think the one quality, and this is just in a random order, is, to your point, intellectually curious. If you are an intellectually curious man, you're going to enjoy Freemason. It's two words. I wrote good heart and also trust. If you're someone that others say, oh, he's a good person, you can trust this person, Freemasonry is probably going to be a good fit. The other one is one that I came across recently listening to another podcast when we talk about service to others as Freemasons. And the example, and it played out for me several times, and it does all the time, where I grew up in Arizona. So when I see a door that's closed and there's a woman that's behind me, I open it for her and I let her walk in front of me and then I walk behind. And if there's another guy walking, I leave my arm out so the door stays open and doesn't slam shut in their face. That's just how I was raised. Now, I don't do that because I'm expecting them to say thank you. It's really weird too when people are like, "Oh wow, people don't do that anymore. Thanks for doing that." Like that's, and I'm like, everybody should be doing that. That's where I think of like service to others, where it's like, I'm not doing this to get a thank you from you. I'm doing this because you're another human, and I want to not see you being suffering in any kind of way of the word suffering. So yeah, to those points, I think those would be the three qualities that would make for a pretty good Freemason if that's something that's inside of your heart. I got a couple more questions with you, Brother Ted, before we close up this episode. We've talked a lot about Freemasonry, what it does for individuals, how it brings men from different stripes, different faiths all together. When you look at Freemasonry as a social organization, and I think about this all of the time, especially in this, we've always lived in a divided country, but also one that has a lot of extremism now in this modern era, where we don't have trust, not only in our neighbors or our leaders, but also even in technology or the information that we're given. Where do you see Freemasonry's role or our strength in the challenges that exist right now today?
Well, I think you're right that our civic infrastructure, both physically and metaphorically, is at an all-time low. This is why Robert Putnam, our social capital guy, is doing his 25th anniversary of his book and created a film called Join or Die, which is literally like, if you don't join these kinds of organizations, your longevity is going to be less. But there's also this social capital that we need to have, that WD-40 across different ideologies and groups to build that bridging social capital. So I think things like Freemasonry can be sort of really, really important. It doesn't mean that it's just Freemasonry, and I don't think that Freemasonry is going to see a 1950s resurgence or anything like that. But we need more organizations like Freemasonry for different groups. And I am seeing younger men come to Freemasonry, particularly just small sample size in a couple lodges I belong to here in Phoenix. I am shocked at the quality of young men who are approaching the lodge of their own free will and accord, if you want to say it that way, and investigating. Whereas people my age, 45 and younger, into their 30s, weren't really interested in this, but it seems the 20-year-olds are really searching for meaning. And so Freemasonry is a great place to be. And so we have a chance to, maybe it's not scale, but it's impact on certain individuals who will be part and parcel and leaders in our communities, to be part of these groups that have intergroup contact, as sociologists say, with different ideas, and thus able to hold two different ideas in their mind, like I said, without their heads exploding, which is the opposite of extremism.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. This new generation that's coming in are becoming Masons. I'm always kind of skeptical because part of me is like, okay, well, in 20 years, these are the people that are going to be taking care of me when I'm retired. But I also look to see what do they find interesting in it, because like you, I joined in my mid-30s. So in my home lodge, I was a young man, and now I'm one of the older guys because DC has a much different demographic. But it is interesting to see them coming in because they are intellectually curious, very so. But they also just have this, it's infectious, and sometimes it can be a little annoying, but this great positive optimism that's their spirit. And I find it so entertaining to be around them when they tell stories. And I feel so much better being around these guys when I get a chance to hang out with them, that I like it. It's almost like a honey in a weird way.
Emotion is contagious. And so it was nice to have some of these young guys with a positive outlook, which is really interesting considering some of the sort of financial realities of the modern world and political realities. It's almost probably a defense mechanism, a coping mechanism to say, well, I can either, sort of acquiesce that we're on the slow decline or the short decline, depending on how you look at it, or I'm going to try to join some of these organizations, better myself and the community, and it's helpful to us.
Let's close out with this question. I hope, and I actually got an email that really touched me a few weeks ago from a brother. Well, now he's a brother, but he was an Insta gentleman. He found the podcast. He listened to a couple of the episodes. It led him to knock on the door of a lodge, and he just took his first degree. I'm sure by the time that this episode airs, he'll be second and probably on his way to doing his third degree. It makes me feel good to know that the mission that we have here at Craftsman Online is to help connect men who have an interest in Freemasonry with our craft. So for someone who's listening right now that's thinking about it, hey, maybe I want to join. What psychological aspects should they be aware of? Not just from the potential benefits that we've talked about, some of the commitment that's also required, but just things that might be off on the side of the road of their highway of life that you can share from your point of view.
I think practically, I would say find a lodge that fits you, and it's okay to shop around and take your time a little bit and investigate multiple lodges. That's okay to do. One that is, you seem to like the brothers in there, and you hit it off with them. That's important. And then it's important to think that and understand that the degree work is medieval and Renaissance and Enlightenment experiences in a modern day context, which is meant to be jarring, because some people might join and be like, well, this ritual is strange, or maybe they looked it up on the internet or whatever and they're worried about this. It's meant to teach lessons, and it's designed in a particular way because we've pulled it from the past, and that shouldn't be scary. That could be exciting, right? And then I would say that there's some brothers who come to me who are highly religious in a certain tradition and have heard a lot of bad things about Freemasonry. I've only experienced good things through the degree work and my associations with Freemasonry, and it's broadened my understanding of what spirituality is and understanding of my own faith tradition. And so I don't think that should be as big of a concern, but I know that for different, groups it can be, and sometimes it's useful to, get paired up and talk with the Catholic brother or the Mormon brother like me, or somebody that, or the Lutheran person or whatever that you're, a little bit worried on if you come from one of those faith traditions. And so it's okay to sit down and ask questions to someone who's done it before you and find out about it.
You can join us on Patreon for just $5 a month, get ad-free episodes, and access to that full back catalog of subscriber extra episodes. See if it's a good fit. Try us out. The link to start your 7-day trial is in the notes for this episode. I'm Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. Until our time together next week, let peace and harmony prevail.